It's Tuesday, January 18th, and you're listening to the Beer Temple Podcast.
Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again.
Hello, and welcome to the Beer Temple Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Quinn. I'm joined by your other host, Mike Shalau.
Hello.
Hey, what's up?
Not much. How are you?
Good. We haven't standardized how we introduce ourselves
I think,
or the show, really.
Yeah, it makes it feel alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us to stutter and stammer and and our
That's
way
right.
through it. So,
Good segue.
yeah, exactly.
On brand.
Yeah, the last time we were together was the. I know I'm going to be thinking about my ums and ahs the entire time.
Good. You set yourself up
The
for
future,
success.
the future.
That's
the
right.
future episode.
That's right. The Beerstradamus, Nostradamus.
Yeah, and I think all three of us predicted that.
There were four of us, weren't there?
Yes, and we all
Three of us predicted there would be four people on the podcast.
Yes, and that Monster would buy Canarchy the following day.
I think that was
right. We picked.
It was the only thing we all agreed on, and we all fought over.
Yeah.
For being like, what was the next big style? It was like, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like, who's gonna buy who? And it's like, Monster Energy is gonna buy Canarchy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Which, when you look at just the names and the vibes behind the names, makes sense. Like, who else could
Yeah.
buy Canarchy than Monster? Like, Anheuser-Busch can't buy Canarchy.
Right.
Monster has to buy Canarchy.
yeah, the names just go together. I mean, what else can they?
Vibes,
they didn't
you
have
know?
a choice. They didn't have a
bought-
choice. They had to.
Right. That's probably how that meeting went.
Yeah.
Canarchy's like, you have to buy us. And they're like, they got us.
Yeah.
They got us again.
So we have a special episode with a special guest, but before we get to that, I want to give some thanks to Wumpin' Radio for having us on yet again. I want to thank producer Serge for the digital equivalents of the ones and twos, keeping us on that, fading us in and out, sideways, all the different directions. He can fade in ways that nobody
I've
even
never
knows.
seen him. Yeah,
As
this
I
is pretty
silence.
impressive.
Yeah, I mean he is. You guys can't see his hands are like a blur right now with all the fades he has going on.
So many fades.
Yeah, I'm actually talking into 17 different microphones right
That's right,
now.
and he's blending them
Yeah.
all.
Speaking of sounds and blending and stuff like that, we are in Studio BT. I was supposed to have us in the other room where it's a little bit warmer, so I'm a bit chilly, but I don't know if you guys are, but hopefully not too much. I've got a little space heater. You might hear that in the background. So
That's just
apologies.
the sound of being in a garage in Chicago, you know?
Yes.
Picture us,
In
we're out
January.
here, we're in the garage, the Bears game is on,
Mm-hmm.
the fridge is full of Miller Lights,
Yep.
and Nance has to make you go to get in the Skylark and get the onions from the Jewels.
Yes.
Serengeti.
Yes. I'm
One of the best poets of our time.
yeah, I don't know.
You know Serengeti? I'm sure you do.
No, I don't know the Skylark and I know that everyone loves that bar, but I'm not sure I've
Oh,
ever
no, I was saying
been
like
to
it's a
it.
Buick, the car.
Oh, the Buick Skylark. Okay. I'm
Favorite
what?
actor, Dennehy. Favorite drink, O'Doul's.
Got it.
Bears.
Bears.
Socks.
Station wagons.
Anyway, this is what
Yeah.
the show is about, right? It's about reciting Serengeti's.
Oh, that guy. Yes, that dude. The Bears, the Chicago rap song.
The
That's
Chicago
amazing.
raps. Yeah, from the number one Chicago rapster,
Yes.
Serengeti.
Yeah, so we have a special episode. We're going to be doing our hot take history. I have a guest this time. I did it solo. It was Oktoberfest, I believe, and pumpkin beer and stuff like that. And although we had a lot of very positive comments and feedback about the solo show, so thank you.
Is it the only solo bolo show ever?
Only one.
Yeah, we should never do that again.
talk.
People liked it. We should never do that again.
Yeah, right. People liked it. Yeah, just me sitting talking into a mic for hour and a half, hour 45, something like that. So, hey, people liked it. I asked for some feedback, and people said they dug it. So I decided not to do it anyway. So, because this one is about the history of pale ale, hot take history. So we're going to be directionally accurate, guys.
Yeah.
And
The Werner Herzog, the ecstatic truth. I think it's more true than the actual facts.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we brought in, the biggest expert on IPAs that I know of personally, which would be
Mike Shalal.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Already starting with big hot takes.
Yes. Jude, what's up? Why don't you introduce yourself? How are you, man?
I'm good. How are you, Chris?
I'm good.
How are you, Mike?
I'm great.
My name's Jude LaRose.
Yep.
Yeah.
Stoked to be here tonight talking about pale ales. I'm good. It's January. January's a good month. I was born in January.
So was I.
Oh, I'm a February guy.
Yeah, well, that's not...
Even
that's
better.
fine.
It's
That's
1
okay.
month better.
It's not Capricorn yet, right?
It's number 2, I'm pretty sure.
I'm
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 an Aquarius.
Aquarius. I'm
an
Aquarius. What are you?
Capricorn.
Oh,
That
see?
makes a lot of sense.
See?
If I knew anything about the Zodiac, that would make a
Yeah,
lot of
that would make
sense.
a lot of sense. I like January.
Look at you
Yeah.
throwing shade at me when we're the same sign. Come
Oh, you're a
on.
different month. You're number 2 month. We're number
Yeah.
1 month, so...
That's true. My wife talks about how much she doesn't like the months of January and February and March, that she just wants to get into April, May, and summer. And I'm like,
doesn't
I
like your-
love,
doesn't like your birthday.
I'm
She
like,
just
it's
doesn't want to see you getting any older.
any happier either, I guess.
So I'm born January 26th, and I remember reading in high school one time there was a report that done for seasonal affective disorder, the worst day of the year for people that suffer from that disorder is January 25th, supposedly.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it's getting better.
So
for
yeah,
your birthday.
the reason it's getting better is I was born the day after that. So
It's true.
You know, it's a good
Yikes.
month.
Yeah, great month.
You're right on the date, huh?
Yeah.
It's a good month. It's a fun month to drink beer. Hop Slam always comes out in January, which
Yep.
is something you look forward to. It's cold. It's snowy. It's kind of like the early start of the year. Not enough has happened yet. Everything feels like nice and innocent and bright. Kind of just like getting into like the good part of winter.
That's right.
Usually the Bears are not in the playoffs, but sometimes they are. There's a lot of good things
Not this
happening.
year.
Drinking some winter IPAs, maybe.
Yep,
Yeah.
and the hot stuff.
The newest iteration of the pale ale.
True. I'm sure by now there might even be a newer one.
There's the late winter IPA.
The late winter.
Yeah.
The springish.
Cold winter.
Yeah.
Cold winter IPA.
Yes, the
Yeah.
cold winter
The cold
IPA.
winter IPA. That rocks.
Yeah. But the crazy thing is cold IPA can't be the latest iteration of pale ale.
You just know.
Yeah.
Why
it can't
not?
be because it's a lager.
Oh man, we're postmodern in style now, though.
True.
I don't want to step on your outline.
Yeah.
We might get
my
there.
outline is very loose
Yeah.
because it's all up here, baby. As I tap my
See.
head, that's the sound of me tapping my head.
This
was
is going to be
actually pretty
fun. Though.
loud.
This is going to be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's
do
what
it.
we're gonna do. We're gonna talk about everyone's favorite style here in the United States. If you like craft beer, there's a very good chance that you like pale ale. I mean IPA, which
So,
is a type
so we're
of
starting
pale
off
ale.
by saying those are the same thing.
No,
All right.
they are
Okay.
types of pale ale. Yeah, right? IPAs are pale ales, right?
right.
They're a sub-style of pale ale. I think that's fair to say, right?
I don't know. You guys
Yeah.
did. So you guys
We
did the
could go-
research.
Yeah.
I did not. I'm here to kind of be like, what are you guys talking about? Whenever you
Yeah.
get too deep in the weeds.
So here's what we're going to try to do is we're going to start way from the beginning and try to get all the way into maybe even the future, anything that we didn't predict on the future episode. But at least to the present.
Yeah.
And my hope is to have a through line in every step. So you see how
Cool.
incrementally it just kind of got from
Right.
some ancient English beer to a
Raspberry
smoothie.
mango.
Yeah,
Yep.
Right.
raspberry mango smoothie IPA.
Because as Tony McGee said on this very show, we're always just on a single point on a curve.
Right.
So we're trying to draw the curve and show you at which point these things existed, right?
Yes.
All right.
And we're going to get to how milkshake, guava, raspberry, strawberry, lactose, oats doesn't exist without ESB, which doesn't exist,
which is not real.
Yeah.
which is not a real thing.
Because people's palates are in the matrix.
Sure.
But
exactly.
that's
Starting with ESB.
That is why history of like beer history is always so interesting to me, because you see how, where stuff came from and why stuff existed to begin with, and that was fun for me for the Oktoberfest and the pumpkin beers, which I think have pretty cool histories and kind of origin stories. Pale Ale doesn't have as much of an origin story. It was kind of just always, or has been around for a long time, and it's just kind of lost to history. But there's a ton of documentation about where it's been lately. So I figured we could just, you want to start at the beginning?
Let's start it to take us back.
We're going to have to go to the
back.
old world.
All the way back.
So we're talking about pale ales, and for that you have to go to England, where most of the most popular craft beer styles originated in. That's, English beer is, I think, obviously England is one of the three big brewing countries of the world. Belgium and Germany, and the Germanic area, being the other two. But I think England has had the biggest impact on U.S. craft brewing for many reasons. We don't have to get into them all, but one of them, we share a language. So I'm guessing that the brewing,
it helps.
Yes, the books on brewing and stuff like that were easier to access when you couldn't get any beer in your
Measurement systems.
There was no Google Translate.
Yeah, exactly.
What?
Google Translate came out of nowhere today. It was listening and just started translating something into German. Didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah, or it just sat there and said, I don't know. Go ask somebody who speaks German. What are you talking to me?
We flipped it to Italian, so I learned how to say "Te amo, Natalia," which was great.
You learned that today?
Yeah, I just said, how did Google told me that today.
Yeah.
I didn't learn it.
I don't know if it was learned.
What is learn? What is
to learn?
Learning doesn't exist. I think we've learned.
Alexa,
that.
what is learn?
So,
yes?
we're in England. People who are listening are going to learn.
Thatched roofs.
Thatched roofs, pale ales. Yep.
Bad teeth.
Bad teeth. So, pale ale predates Pilsner, predates pretty much all pale beer. The original pale beers were likely these pale ales or kind of were around at the same time. And before that, most beers would have been a little bit darker and probably a little sweeter and probably a little smoky as well. All that because of how the grains were toasted, how the malt was kilned, and they used to do it with literally like hay and wood.
Right, they would burn a fire directly underneath the bed to kiln it, right? Or at least nearby.
And even when there was coal, they couldn't use coal because you would poison yourself. It would turn the grain. It would make the grain poisonous.
Yeah.
But with the invention of when Coke was available for exactly that kind of Coke, the Coke that the carbon based Coke that you could get an even temperature and it would be just a more reliable way to kiln. They could lightly toast things. Yes.
And burn, quote unquote, clean, right?
Clean Coke.
Clean Coke.
Yeah.
But
the Koch brothers were around back then.
Yeah. How are we spelling this?
Yeah.
And which pack told you to say that?
Exactly.
There's probably no hops, right? Mostly using herbs and spices.
Yeah, right. But flavor
fermentation is a little rough at the time.
But for the killing of the malt, the cleanness is in that it gives off no aromatic compounds that can be absorbed into the malt.
Right. Exactly.
From how it was kilned, which is mostly at that time from a heated smoked source, right?
Right.
Which is making its way into the malt.
So that was kind of a
And
revolution for many reasons. I mean, just that flavor of beer wasn't really prevalent in that way. And you could also, they learned that when you had these pale malts, as we now know now, they're more fermentable than the darker malts.
Their efficiency was higher. There's more
yes.
enzymes to convert in the mash.
So they could make drier beers as well. They were more fermentable. They were more efficient. You could use less grain to get the same amount of alcohol
And it's
in
important
a
that
certain quantity.
they were taxed by the weight of grain they were buying. Right now, we're taxed differently. We're not taxed by the weight of grain we're buying.
I don't know back then how they were taxed. I know England now and for a while it's been famous for taxing based on alcohol content, which is why a lot of the session beers kind of arose.
which would tie to each other, though.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why you have the 60 shilling and the 90 shilling and all that stuff was the amount of, I think, tax per barrel or something.
But the way they calculated that, from my understanding, was how much grain you were buying. They
Got
weren't
it.
coming around and actually measuring the density of your beers necessarily.
Okay.
I could be very wrong.
No, I mean,
But so part of the reason that they wanted to use the pale malt and they switched from making port with all kind of dark smoky malt to pale malt and a little bit of dark malt was you could use a lot less weight to achieve the same.
they're getting over on the
alcohol
tax
content.
man.
Yeah.
But what you guys are saying is that there's more to the decision than I want to brew this beer like this,
Right.
to these specifications.
Right.
There's a lot of other considerations that are taking place at the time, which force your hand to do certain things.
Right.
You're just trying to get by, and you're trying to make your way within the system. And then a lot of these beers are a result of just
Yeah.
what
And
they're
always
telling you
has
you
been.
can and cannot do, or what you
Yep.
can and cannot do.
So pale malt now is the basis for all beer styles, and it quickly became that in England as well. This same malting technique is what caused the Pilsner to be invented. They were trying to go after this pale ale that became really, really popular in England, and that's why beers like Orval, as we were talking about with Mike Siegel, those beers were just there. The Belgian attempts to mimic these pale ales that were really taking over and becoming really, really popular. And I guess a pale ale was, it was pale, and it tended to be aged a little bit and bitter, a little more bitter. And by bitter, not sweet is kind of what they meant. I'm actually drinking a mild right now. I'm drinking Commercial Suicide from Jester King, and I'm guessing this is a lot drier than the milds of yesteryear were probably. So they were very young, very young. Remember, there's no understanding of microbiology. There's no refrigeration. There's probably very little hops used, and these things would spoil. So these beers were incredibly young. So a matured, quote unquote, beer could be, to us, not that old, to be considered a little bit of an older beer. So that was bitter was kind of in comparison, and an aged bitter to these like milds and porters and stuff like that. Well, porters could be aged, but they would become sour. So,
And during this time, that's a big beer. Right?
porter was huge. Mm-hmm.
So this is serving as the other beer, right? You got porter, and then you've got this other paler, more drinkable, more bitter that's the opposite of this other thing that's popular at the time throughout different areas of England. And everyone's got their own tastes.
Right.
And their own agendas, and they're looking at making some money and sending beer to other places. But
Yeah. So the term bitter was actually not something that was chosen by the brewers. They called the beer pale ale, but the people who would call for the beer would call it bitter, as opposed to sweet. The sweet mild, and then you'd have the bitter. So they would start calling it bitter, and that name kind of stuck. They didn't have, it was funny, I should go back a little bit and say that every single thing that I am saying is me trying to accurately retell what Martin Cornell is saying in Amber, Gold, and Black, or Amber, Black, and Gold, or what's the name?
Amber, Gold, ampersand, black.
Yes. Amber, Gold, ampersand, Black. Martin Cornell. If you want a dry read that is incredibly dense, I mean, this guy...
You're really selling it.
I mean, if you just want to get the information...
Very English.
The information and know that it's accurate. There is a lot of misinformation in beer lore and fairy tale and history out there, but this guy is, I would say, as trustworthy as anyone. Him and Ron Pattinson are the two.
And he's just going around and trying to find out as much about the topic he's interested in at a time that he wasn't around, right? So these are stories that are being passed down.
Yeah. And he's going through old advertisements, old journals, old newspaper articles, like anything he can find that references beer from this time. And what he seems to believe is that, you know how like in England, if you've ever been there, they have those like little like clips that go on the front of the hand pump, and they just like slide a little card in, or sometimes they even use a coaster, and they just kind of sit the coaster in there. That wasn't invented until, I forget what it was, like 18 something. So they couldn't put the name of the beer on there. They couldn't really brand it on tap. So people would just call out what it was, or they would have a little sign that the bar would make. So the fact that they were calling it pale ale or such and such didn't really matter. People were calling for it as bitter, and that's kind of how it became. But, and this is important, pale ale and bitter, unequivocally the same thing. They're synonymous, always have been, and that is just kind of very, very plainly stated by Martin. In fact, he like looks at literally the first mention of the term bitter in writing that he could see, and it was in an ad for the first mention of bitter wasn't in writing, was from an ad for an Australian pale ale, which I also find interesting. So it's an English beer marketed as an Australian pale ale, but I guess it was also called a bitter, right? But it's interesting to me too, because we're going to talk about India Pale Ale, obviously, in a little bit. But apparently, there's other pale ales, too, right? I mean, I know there's that, like, Australian sparkling ale is a style that you see.
But that's, like, from Australia.
Right.
It's not like, oh, we were sending it to Australia, so we had to sparkle it up.
Right, exactly. For those, they love the sparkle.
It seems like everyone had a different definition or, like, a different set of criteria that they used to say whether a beer was this style or that style. You're going through and they're either trying to come up with the difference between this is ale and this is beer, and they're going through the differences in starting gravity, and just like how it's interesting to see. You start out not knowing anything about beer, going back to all of the books and reading everything, and you take everything that you read to be absolute gospel. And that forms your basis, and then you're set off, and then you start to come up with your own set of truths. And then you go back to the very beginning, and you see that the set of truths that were created are all, they're kind of sketchy, or they're not sketchy, but they're all put together in a way that was
they're
just probably
sketchy,
natural,
like literally
to
sketchy.
Yes.
They're kind of sketched together. You know, it's not a photograph. It's a sketch that has a likeness of how we see it.
Yeah, I think you're getting at we think there's a purity to this history of these things. Then you get to like into the weeds, and you're like, well, they weren't really sure either. But they wrote it definitively, but there it's like an amalgamation of, stories told and advertising and all these different things that go into it.
Yeah, and what they're using to determine that, and then you look back and you're like, well, I don't care about that so much right now, or like in modern times, we don't use that as the defining whatever to determine what this is. But then you're like, oh, you were really concerned about this. This was the difference between this And it's like,
These are the hills you were dying on in the 1800s.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, so then you learn, like, depending on what you look at and what you read and who you talk to, that everyone's got like 5 different answers.
Right. Yeah. I
And
mean,
then you're
it's-
here.
Yeah. So, and just us trying to
Piece it all together.
piece it all together. So basically, I think pale ale, 1600s, bitter, Victorian time. So like way later did that term start to come around, and people were calling it bitter. It also seems that bitter, when it was being mentioned, was IPA. So like, or
So the liquid itself tasted more like what we would consider IPA.
no, it was IPA, or more specifically, it was pale ale from Burton, which is where the best pale ales were made because their water was just, perfect for, accentuating hop and making kind of crisp, pale beers. And yeah, the people were drinking pale ale as prepared for India was what it was called. And it was this cosmopolitan thing to be drinking because there is some truth to that story where the soldiers, obviously India was a huge English colony, and the East India Trading Company was basically almost like a private country. It was just massive, and all the bureaucrats and workers and soldiers and stuff, they would be, I guess they took a special liking to this beer. I've read books on IPA as well, and they did modify the pale ale. They made it a little stronger. They hopped it a little bit more. Both things, the higher alcohol and the higher amount of hops, helped prevent spoilage and the long kind of unrefrigerated trip by ship to India. And they liked it. It tasted good. Porter was also being sent there. It wasn't the only type of beer. There was plenty of porter being sent to India as well. Yeah.
But sorry, go ahead.
You go, Mike.
I was saying the way that seems to be being marketed is that it's now becoming less of a thing that they're like, we have to do this for the preservative qualities, and it actually becomes the flavor of the time. Whether that's because people liked it naturally or they thought there's something exotic about this being the thing we're sending to India.
Yes,
but
exactly.
Something
that was
about
definitely
that.
part of it.
Yeah.
It was like cool and exotic, and this is what the people over there were drinking.
Right.
And it did become more popular back in England, or more was consumed there than was ever consumed in India at some point.
And imagine that there are people starting breweries in England, and some are porter breweries, and some are making more of this like pale variety. And then you run into shipping constraints, or whatever the shipping environment
Supply chain
is
issues?
like. Yes.
Yeah.
In the parlance of our times.
It just happens now. Never happened before.
Yeah.
But that, that there are things out of your control to get, everyone's trying to make money. They're trying to get their beer all the way over there. The only way they get their beer all the way over there is a ship, to take it that way. But someone saying you can't send the ship, right? And then someone says, well, I've got the beer that, can go on the ship. It takes a longer time to get there and be better than your porter beer over here.
Yeah.
So, okay. So now India Pale Ale, starts to become more
Well, you
popular
come
than
back
porter.
They're like they're drinking a lot of it over there.
Yeah.
Why
Let me
aren't
see
you
that book real quick, because there is a, as you guys are talking about it, this guy, Martin Cornell.
with a Y.
We think
Yeah.
these are all like choices. And it's more so like there's opportunity to do this, so now I'm going to do it.
Right.
Or
Right.
I don't
We-
care about IPA or
Yeah.
porter.
We look
I care
back-
about making money.
we look
This
back-
thing goes over there a lot. Like this thing can stand up.
We look back with the lens of like these artisans were just trying to make the best tasting thing, and really it's like, oh, we can sell more beer in India, and they're going to buy all of it? Oh, yeah, let's make it taste like, this is what it takes to get it over there. And the people are like, oh, this is pretty good. This is actually like, we'll drink this here too.
Yeah.
You should drink it here. The people in India are drinking a lot of it.
You should start a brewery. They're making a lot of money over
Yeah,
there.
they're
All you
making
got to
a lot,
do is
yeah.
hop this up.
But
Imagine
there
if they
was
just
a
opened a brewery
guy.
in India.
They have a bunch of references to IPA. Bass was making it,
Yeah.
and there's this guy Hodgson, who, as of 1869, people were saying back then that he was the first to do it. He was the first to make IPA. But it was probably around the 1830s, right? 1830s, 1840s, and it was probably he had a slushy machine, so
Right.
he would put the beer
Or
into that.
an ice cream,
Yeah.
alcoholic ice cream maker.
He had a nice alcoholic ice cream maker.
He had back then. You couldn't just call up Amaretti and get any flavoring you wanted. He had the IPA flavoring.
Right.
They were making it in Burton.
Yeah, and then sending it out to everyone.
Can you imagine if he had a crawler machine?
Oh my God!
Oh, my goodness.
Game over. People,
send it over.
All the people from India would be going to his tap room, and there'd be
Send it over.
all the bottle shops in India would close.
Yes,
all the
it's
beer
true.
bars in India would close because of tap rooms in Burton.
If only.
Anyway, sorry.
If only.
Derailed that far enough.
No,
Let's get
this
back.
is great so far. This is, I think, like,
Yeah.
this is fun talking about this and really going through. You look back at the history of the stuff and you feel that these are all choices. Everything is very pure, and if you go through it all, you realize more what was going on in society, or what going on Pilsner brewing, or going on with just signs of the times, and probably what came before this beer, which was probably dark and clunky and chunky and rancid and gross, and who knows? And now you've got something that's cleaner.
Yeah.
That's it. That's just it. It's just cleaner.
It's an innovation in technology, to be perfectly honest. The way that we think about like the iPhone now, the way that they kiln that malt is a similar effect on the economy as to having like, well, now you can make a movie on your computer.
Right.
So like it's obviously not exactly the same thing, but it is like technology driving a big change in the way people behave and the way that money moves through hands.
And you wonder, like, what's going on with transportation at the time? How are people getting from place to place? Are railroads becoming more prevalent? How is word getting from the north of England to the south of England?
Yeah, they used channels and like canals and stuff like that is how they got stuff from Burton to London, which is where most of it was drank. That's where porter, the home of porter is London. The home of pale ale is Burton. That's where Bass was from originally.
Yep.
And yeah, for a while, there was a time where Bass was the biggest brewery in the world, and it was on the back of Bitter, of Bitter. But that didn't really happen until way later than I realized. I mean, I think you may find this interesting. So it was, I think, not even until Bitter first came around in the 1840s, but it didn't become the most popular style of beer in England until the 1960s. So, like, mild was the most popular before that, and porter was the most popular before that.
So we were talking like, what, 100, 200 years of mild and porter still being the dominant style before
Bitter, which now I think of still as like,
1960?
That's what, yeah.
That's what he said.
the man
Became popular in 1960.
The crazy thing is, I think the
Verify
amount of
that.
beer these breweries were producing,
Crazy.
most of the breweries, I feel, the largest percentage of breweries nowadays are producing less than 1,000 barrels, and I feel the 5, 10, I don't know, however many breweries in England at this time, they're producing like hundreds of thousands
those
of barrels, at least 50,000 barrels.
just the vats in the porter breweries before they would brew into them, they would have parties inside of the vats
Yeah, they were so
with
big.
dozens of people.
I cannot fathom that.
Maybe you got a new fooder from Fooder Crafters rolls into the new Hop Butcher space, and you're like, let's throw a party. Let's invite
Let's, like, christen the
150
fooder.
people to dance in this fooder before we fill it up with beer.
Yeah, right. It was
That's how you
crazy.
get like real character in
They were
there.
giant, massive, and it was like a point of pride how big they could make them, until one of them failed Yeah, and
And
blew out the
flooded
wall
blocks.
and flooded blocks and killed people, drowned people, literally. So they drowned.
I was
going to
make a joke about Anheuser. Like, can you imagine if Anheuser-Busch and Food Crafters met each other during that time? But
Right.
that is not brought up well
It'd be
after
even-
you
be even
saying
bigger.
that.
Well, these people
But-
they drowned a long time
Yeah.
ago. It's okay.
Yeah, no one cares.
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine Augustus Bush?
Yeah, right.
Which one? 1, 2, 3, or 4?
One
One. Yeah.
Oh, the OG.
going some fresh Missouri oak.
Yeah. Beechwood.
Yep.
Living in it.
So yeah. So
Beechwood
bitter
Fritters.
didn't really become the most popular, but bitter was still a thing. And I've always wondered why bitter never became really like a popular style in the U.S. because in the U.S. pale ale was being made. What would be considered kind of maybe the old school pale ale, or at least maybe like proto, or even like just bitter if it was pale ale.
Can you imagine if you
English-style
went
pale
to like a baseball stadium or a football stadium in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and they were drinking bitter?
ale. Right?
It sounds like it's something I would love right now, but if it was the dominant style, I probably would be like, that's not that cool.
But even in like in
What
other
about
countries,
soccer culture? What about
Yeah.
what is bitter owe to football overseas? What does it owe to soccer? And that
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Football clubs go back a long time over there. We wonder what those two things have to do with each other.
I'm sure they were drinking plenty of bitter in those things.
Meanwhile, we have lager breweries over here.
Right?
Yeah,
Going
well,
crazy.
The Germans got
Yeah.
to take over the brewing culture of America for at least the commercial brewing culture of
Yeah.
America for a very long time.
Which is what they say why pale ale never took off here, is because by the time pale ale arrived here, lager brewing was gangbusters.
Could it be part of the reason, and this is totally speculative, but part of the reason that English brewing, not just the language and the measurements, were so important for home brewing was because when you listen to people talk about home brewing in the early days, like, I wanted to make beer that I couldn't get here. So if bitter had become the ascendant style, would people have been home brewing lager or something where they're like, this is the ascendant?
Oh, I'm sure
so
they
it's just
would've.
like, it's because it was the counterculture to the.
And we're going to get to that.
Yeah,
and
sorry, this is way ahead.
We're
right-
not
yeah.
that far. We're very close
Okay,
to that.
cool. I
But-
didn't mean
We're
to.
at
I did-
1969.
Yeah.
We're about to be on
Yeah.
1970 and talk about
1976.
home
Thank you.
brewing.
Thank you, Jimmy
we'll
Carter.
take a step back a little bit because I just found
200
something
years.
interesting is that why it was never called bitter here, Cornell posits, is because by the time bitter was popular here, the bulk of the English immigrants had already come over to the U.S. and they were brewing pale ale and porter and stuff like that, but it was called pale ale, where by the time it was, the style was now being called bitter, those people had already left. But in other countries like Australia and New Zealand, where the emigrations happened later, they do call them bitters there. So the bitter style has more of a history, the name anyway, even for similar styles, just because English people got there later and bitter was already a term. So the style had been getting made here in the U.S., but they didn't call it bitter because there was no reason to, and they had kind of predated that term, so to speak, which I just thought was cool. Like, just how random is that,
How these things get
Lexical.
decided, and
Yeah.
then 100 years later.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think now there is a bit of a pause because essentially now you have, Prohibition and you have just, colonial brewing before that, and the lagers definitely were the most dominant style. And pale ales were around, but they slowly died out. There was consolidation, and we have nothing but very, very light mass market beer. And
So
even
what year are we at right now?
I think it's you tell me. When was all this happening? Probably in the 60s and 70s.
70s.
At the 70s was when it's at its worst.
Yeah.
Right.
And how about this too? If we're going back, where are the hops coming from at the time? And where are they grown? Probably in New York State, somewhere along that, and
Biggest hop growing region for a long time in America.
Yep.
and what are those hops? Probably EK, the Goldings and Fuggles.
Some bastardized version of it, probably.
Yeah, and they had to come over.
Do you hate Goldings and Fuggles?
No,
I'm not Fuggle. I'm not
kidding.
a big Fuggle fan. I'll put it out there.
It's got a bad name.
I mean, Goldings are great.
EKG, lovely.
Fuggles is a mother of Citra. I believe Goldings is too. And Brewer's Gold, I think, there's 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what else do you have at the time? And where's it coming from?
Right.
Aside from Neo Mexicanas hops,
And what condition are you getting them in?
sure.
Right.
If they're coming over, bad.
Bad.
Right.
Even if they're grown here.
Yep.
What are kilning practices like?
There's not a lot of
What's
hop growing history.
what's the possibility
America,
that
right?
those hops are going to be able to be utilized in the way that we think about them right now? Very, very low.
Right. I mean, what are you talking about? Like even
Anytime you would want to make a hop driven beer before the time, like the what are we talking? This
Right.
1960s where we've arrived at now.
yeah.
Yeah, like what? There's not really available American hops that taste any different, or would be what you would want in a modern IPA.
Yeah.
I think is what you.
Nothing very fruity. I feel by 1960 we're going to have some of those modern varieties around.
Yeah. So there's a few
Going
things
back
happening.
100 years before that. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's massive consolidation of literal breweries and of style. Light
Fuller's
beer.
has bought.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly. Fuller's has bought out
Guinness.
Guinness.
Twitter
and-
is going
and
crazy in
yeah.
England.
It's all
Bass has finally started their pro shops in America.
Sure, right. We've got 10 satellite brew pubs.
That's right.
exactly. They push to have that
Pyramid
that,
in Memphis.
and that's crazy.
ESB is trademarked.
That's right. Fuller's. SOBs.
All right, hold on. I'm trying to keep.
This is inside. Sorry, we got
sorry.
No.
So we're going
and it's
back
gonna
in.
go. It's gonna definitely be in your court in a moment, Jude, because it's things are about to flip, and you're going to be by far the subject matter expert. In
You will
just
still
a
be the
moment.
subject matter expert before me.
We
when
will.
It comes to
We
this.
will see. But there's a few things happening. You have all this consolidation. You have this similarity of style. You have these hops that are being grown in the U.S. in the Pacific Northwest. And one interesting thing about like some of these big breweries was you're talking about like hop, really just hop. What do you call it? Technology or just kind of state of the art kind of hop utilization and maintenance.
Yeah, there's also perspective, right? Because a lot of these things that will be desirable bred in these hops were not desirable. Like you'll read old
Exactly.
English hops trying to like, oh, it has a citrusy thing. We don't want that.
Exactly.
Well, no one's
or
talking
as
about
like a
alpha
black currant
right,
or
yes.
dank or the idea that a hop would taste like onions is just no way.
We're
Exactly.
not breeding for alpha acids.
And
We're not
all-
talking
yeah.
about those things.
Yeah, at least not.
Well, in a way-
aroma varietals. For
So
sure.
so the big breweries, and even when it wasn't necessarily the biggest, Anheuser-Busch was known for really pushing for the highest quality ingredients they could, which
Right.
up until the time they were bought out by InBev was the case. May still be the case. I think it's kind of faltered a little bit, but they were the ones pushing the hop technology, the hop farmers, the
Right. And
the processes for kilning and all that stuff.
They were
and
getting
people
into
storage.
don't
bottles. They
believe
were
it,
getting
right?
into refrigerate. Like no one was bottling. No one was
Right.
focused on keeping beer cold. No one was focused on
No.
refrigeration. That
That was all Budweiser.
There's a reason they got to be the biggest. It wasn't because they were like, oh, our distribution network is so good. No, the distribution network came after because their
Yeah.
beer was so much more interesting because had the best malt, they had the best rice, they had the best hops, and they kept pushing
Yeah.
the growers. They
And
bought their
high alpha. You can thank Budweiser for that too, for these high alpha hops, because they were pushing them now so they could get the same amount of bitterness. It's like the pale
like save
pale
money.
malt of
Yeah.
hops. You know, they can buy less hops and get the same amount of bitterness from
Was
them.
he in a room with? I always want to say Carnegie, but it's Carnegie, right?
Carnegie,
is
the trains.
Are they like having Pilsner beer, lager beer?
Yeah.
And they're talking about.
Carnegie's Scottish, so he might be having.
What are we talking about? How do we get? Oh,
a Scotch?
who was also making pale ale?
Yeah, they were. They were
Yeah.
making.
They were
pale ale.
making pale ale in Scotland.
Absolutely. They all were.
Yeah.
All those guys were drinking that stuff.
But you can thank Anheuser-Busch for the American hop growing
Absolutely.
and moving to the Pacific Northwest. Like
Yep.
Willamette hops, which now are kind of thought of as somewhat pedestrian, but were transcendently different and amazing.
And Miller was
when
paying
that
for
there.
Citra.
Yep.
Yep.
And, Asahi
Yeah, Miller,
was doing all of the research on.
We're getting a little ahead
Yeah.
again,
Yes,
slightly.
But,
Sorry.
I think what
Yeah.
we're going, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what we're getting into is that it's deeper than you think.
Right.
And
But
that
it-
there's
and it
so
was-
much to the story
Right.
about what
The
we're
story
drinking
isn't
now.
just like craft brewers found these hops in the wild. It's like, no, these things were being bred and purposely bred. And,
Right.
and
Absolutely.
I prayed to a body of Westy 12, and up came Mosaic from the ground.
I put a bottle of Westy 12 upside down in my backyard, and all of a sudden I was making hazy, juicy IPAs.
Yeah. Then
That's
London
just
3
how it
came.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I had a Boddington.
So you've got all these people now who I think they're baby boomers, right? So all these baby boomers have gotten out of college, and their parents are probably the wealthiest generation ever in this country
Thus
far, and their kids are going to college, they're going abroad, they're doing all this stuff, and they are backpacking around Europe and tasting all these crazy beers and then coming back and being like, what did we miss? Like, how did our country become this shitty when it comes to just the beer? And I think the beer in the 70s is probably a lot worse, even like the big guys, than it is now.
Because like now when you pick those things up, great quality is consistent.
Yes.
Like it's going to be clean. It's going to taste the same all the time. Not always the case in the 70s.
Right.
That stuff. You read about a lot of
Schlitz
shortcuts.
destroyed itself,
Yeah.
basically.
Ate
by
itself
yeah.
alive with the adjuncts
Yeah.
and things like that. And adjuncts not being like cupcakes, but being like foam stabilizers that were actually poisonous or things like that.
Yeah, just bad things,
Yeah.
bad things. So these guys all come back, and if you're of a certain age, like my age, and you read about any of these home breweries, these craft breweries starting, they all have such a similar story where it was like, I came back from having these amazing beers in, insert European nation, and I couldn't get it here, so I started to make them myself. And at this point, we're going to start talking about USA, because I think now USA becomes, up until now, the center of pale ale globally at this point. And now we're in the late 70s, very early 80s, And these people, I'm going to use Ken Grossman as an avatar for these people. There weren't tons of them, but and Ken Grossman was not the only one, but I think he's just a perfect vessel for what was happening.
And there's probably only very big breweries who make nothing but lager
Right.
at this time.
Yeah. A few
There's
exceptions.
and think about
Beer that takes a
in
long time to make.
in a world where there's only 73 breweries, and they all make
Exactly.
pale lager.
And they all make pale lager. And
New
the ones who
Albion
are
emerges from the
making
mist.
ale are trying to make it taste as much like lager as possible. So you have like cream ale, Genesee cream ale.
Yeah.
They're trying to be as far from what, as close to lager as they possibly can.
Beer was as much of a commodity as has ever been. Period.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Industrial, make it clear, make it pale,
Cheaper.
make it cheap.
The cheaper, the better. Lighter, absolutely light. And you're still in the Miller Lite, great, tastes great, less filling, kind of that sort of era.
Yeah.
That might have been a few
80s,
years
yeah.
later, but
Families are a certain
Yeah.
way, right? Like
Yeah.
the way you consume things are a certain way.
Right.
There's a certain ideology at the time.
And that the peak of American production at the time is Wonder Bread and things where it's
Sure.
so pure and so how do they even make it like that so consistently? Like that's the ideal
industrial technology.
The
kind
same
of-
that's what
everywhere.
the ideal consumer choice is. How did they make it so pure and so white and so fluffy? And that's the one that has to be the best because that's.
Remember, this is on the tails of the space age.
Right.
Like
TVs,
technology was
microwaves.
huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
TV dinners.
MTV. No,
Right.
Not
I mean, it's
just
kind of like
not
now.
yet.
It's
Okay,
kind of
okay,
like
okay.
now with like
I'm on my
tech things. If anything is tech, oh, this thing gets me a mattress in not as good a way as going to the mattress store down the street. Awesome. I'm going to only use this now.
Right. I'm going to sleep poorly for the next 30
Right.
years, but it gets delivered right to my house. That's the
Wow,
way
I didn't
gotta
get to
do it.
try it at all.
It was on
Amazing.
it was on a podcast I liked, and I got
Right.
$10
I mean,
off
all that
this
stuff is going to
$3,000
be-
Were
mattress.
you just describing now?
yeah, that is right now.
That is going to be the Wonder Bread. People are
Right.
going to look back at that. At this
Do you
stuff
remember
as
we were all
Wonder Bread.
sleeping on memory foam mattresses that were 2 inches thick that got delivered right to our door, and all of us had back problems when we were 28?
Exactly.
You know, and we're at the height too, probably, right? Like baseball's
I
going off,
hope so.
football's going
Yeah.
off, advertising is taking off. Are we 10 years past the height of advertising? Are we in the thick of advertising?
Oh, I think
Everything
we're-
is
I
like
think we're still in the
ascendant.
thick of it.
mass,
Yeah.
mass anything
Yeah.
is the best.
Yes. Yes. So, yeah, you know what? I am too. Why
Yes.
don't we? Well, we all have to go to the bathroom.
Take a
Let's
quick-
just be real.
quick break, yeah.
All right. So we'll come back, and we're at the very origins of
American.
This
American
story
Pale
turned to
Ale.
America.
Yes. All right. Well done, Serge. Welcome back to the Beer Temple podcast. I'm sitting here with Mike and Jude, and we're talking the history of Pale Ale, and I think we're just to the point where it's going to get a lot more familiar to a lot of the people listening and to us included. We were, talking about a young Kenneth Grossman who was
Kenneth Grothman, the ninth.
Esquire.
Yeah.
who was with a small group of brewers who wanted to create some of the beers that they had when they were abroad. They wanted to create some of these pale ales, some of these hoppy beers, and they started homebrewing. And basically, like, Charlie Papazian and Ken Grossman and people like that. Fritz Maytag, kind of a side story, a little bit different trajectory for that guy. But, I mean, I think if we're talking about the history of Pale Ale, we're talking about these dudes who were doing this sort of thing. And as you were mentioning earlier, Jude, the hops that were here in the U.S., weren't being used they're only being used in kind of a certain way. They were certainly bitter. They were bittering hops. They were hops that, for the time, were considered very bitter and did not have pleasing flavor and aroma to the breweries who were purchasing them. And if Ken Grossman is kind of an avatar for the breweries starting up at the time and the home brewers at the time, I would say Cascade could be an avatar for these hops, right? And you have a hop that is high in alpha acid. It was used for bittering. Remember, at the time,
Yeah, contextually.
at the time, it was a high alpha hop.
Very aggro.
Was it topping out at 10?
No,
Did it
it's
get
like
there?
5.5. Like
Cascade?
it's like 6, 7, maybe.
8? Give me 8. At least 8.
I won't give you 8.
7?
I mean, that's where it's still at, isn't it? Maybe it's
Maybe.
9.
So, yeah, and I believe I went to go and look, but I believe it was originally an attempt to make an American noble hop. So they wanted it to be something that could be used for flavor and aroma, and kind of give that noble hop quality. Noble hops being the classic kind of lager hops, the German hops. So that's what Cascade was trying to do. And wherever I read that, I also read that the German brewers and maybe even the big U.S. brewers said it was, just commercially unacceptable for flavor and aroma. We'll use it as a bittering hop. And I'm guessing, as it is still the case today, bittering hops are much less expensive than these primo flavor hops, right, guys? I mean,
Yeah.
Jude, you would know,
Mike,
right?
you're saying.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
go for it. You would know, Mike. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the hop market, if you look at it as like an economic worldwide market is entirely based on alpha acids. It's about the bittering possibility of per acre. So there's quite a lot of aroma hops being grown, but they don't affect the actual economics in the way that of this as a market, right?
They do more
More
so
than-
now than they used to.
Absolutely.
It was all alpha.
Absolutely.
But when aroma started to arrive,
But even when we're talking about how like beautiful Saaz coming from, or like Tetnang, like those were still not really part of the worldwide market, and
No.
we're closer than that than we've ever been. But it was all alpha as far as that was concerned.
and the biggest breweries needed to spend the least amount of possible to get the biggest bitterness they
bittering.
could
Right.
out of what that they had.
Right.
And what we haven't talked about too is like what was the profile of these beers? They were malt driven, right? So they've got these kind of probably like bready, caramelly, dark fruit flavors, fermented with ale yeast. Where's fermentation at the time? Esters are coming through. And then what are the hops doing? They're just balancing those things out with some earthy characteristics, maybe floral at most.
What are you talking about?
There's seasoning.
In
England.
bitters, yes, in England.
Yeah.
Yeah.
mhm, Yeah.
Seasoning, right?
Yeah.
The protein of the meal is the malt, and the seasoning, the salt of the meal is the hops, right? The coriander,
Yes.
if you're cooking.
Are we tasting any type of are we tasting pear and apple?
Maybe.
Are we tasting like
With
a black
fermentation character.
currant type of
Well,
flavor?
Pear and apple are probably coming from fermentation, and currant would be coming from
Hops.
hops. Yeah, and
I
that would be
don't
an
know.
undesirable thing in the hops
Yeah,
at that point,
I think
right?
they wanted green, they wanted herbal, they wanted
right. spicy hop, quote unquote hop character.
Sounds like you're
right?
describing Pilsner when you say that.
Right. Right.
There's some overlap.
They wanted
Right.
that out of bitter.
Yeah. That's
the
what they
hops that were
wanted.
going in
They
there.
wanted
maybe
yeah.
floral, maybe.
Yeah.
But the idea that these things should be citrusy or fruity or tropical was primarily not likely given the terroir they were growing in, and secondarily not desired.
English people were tasting characteristics of Simcoe probably at the time, but in Cascade, and it tasted like cat piss, and they were saying,
They're like, no, this
No
is a
way.
flaw.
which would become,
It's a whole other show we should talk about. Is just like, what's a flaw? What are flaws?
Right. I mean,
what was somebody's trash and garbage at that point then started a revolution, right?
The brewery?
Yes. Also, Revolution, big fans of Simcoe. But Chris was getting, so when Chris is bringing up where we're going to with Cascade, it helps to talk about the fact that, the flavor profile at this time and the hops profile, it's all towards one thing.
Right.
So there's
And
probably
so-
some hops that are being left to the side that no one wants, that are probably cheaper, that someone who's interested in, keeping costs down because they're starting a brewery and doing everything themselves, it's going to set the stage for them to come up at a
Maybe
time when
these
craft
things are
breweries are coming
cool.
up. Yeah.
And maybe the difference in them is actually beneficial and something people will like.
Right.
Maybe hippies who like jam band music. I don't know.
Exactly.
So you're
yeah,
setting
that's,
up
that's what
Sierra.
happened. Yeah, exactly. And then, okay, so let me try to remember where we were talking about. I think we're still talking about young Kenneth Grossman.
The young
And
Kenneth.
yes, we were talking about alpha acid hops are generally, that's what the commodity market's based on. They're cheaper than these exotic flavor aroma hops
Right,
now.
they're commodities.
And so even then that was true in the early, very, very early, late 70s, early 80s. And the story goes that there was all this local cheap alpha acid hop that was not suitable for aroma, called Cascade and stuff similar to it. And people were like, I don't know, I think it's kind of got a cool taste. And they started making these British bitters, these Americanized versions of these bitters, these pale ales. Remember, they're synonyms of the same thing, and making pale ales, right? It wasn't called American pale ale. It was just pale ale, and it was them trying to equate what they were drinking somewhat. Maybe, making it a little bit hoppier. But it seems like that was more or less what they were trying to do was make these beers that they were drinking.
I mean, I'm genuinely getting excited at this point in the story about like how things are about to just go.
Right.
You know, like that we're still trying to recreate this British style, and we're using the stuff we can get.
Yeah. So now you have Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, the father of IPA, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's where it all kind
American IPA for
yeah, and it is based with Cascade. It has this grape fruity flavor that people hadn't had before, and a lot of stuff is coming into play with this. It's from Northern California. You know, he's up in Chico. He has a we don't have to get into that whole story. He's got a homebrew supply shop, and he's welding his own stuff.
Right.
Well, do you have the third wave of Chicago breweries? Do you have that happening then, but on a much more smaller scale, which is, you know, I've tasted this, I'm getting into this, I want to do this, but there's only like 3 of them. And they say, we're going to start a brewery.
Yeah.
And things are much different. Yeah,
oh my
access to
gosh.
ingredients are so much different. There are no micro breweries.
There's also
There's no equipment. You have to make it.
The access to quality ingredients, right? That no one thought Cascade was a quality ingredient necessarily, but it was. And the access to yeast. Like White Labs literally grew out of Chris White selling yeast to Ron Grossman, like in parking lots. They would meet up in a parking lot to get vials for his homebrew shop. Right. And so like super clean Chico ale yeast that allowed these hops to express themselves in a way that a more ester-driven English ale yeast or English source ale yeast didn't exist.
In Europe,
wasn't available. Like these things maybe existed, but they weren't. Like, you couldn't just buy them or you couldn't grow them up. Like,
sure,
it was harder to do. So
you're an entrepreneur, right? You want to start a company, but in the face of all of these, you know, let's call them corporations, but just all these like larger brewers, it's capital intensive, and you're trying to convince people like you need money to start up. I mean, are you convincing people to give
what
you
equipment
money?
are you going to buy?
Right.
Well, no equipment exists to make it at the size I want to. There's no such thing. They don't make brew houses the size that I need to make it.
But they do make milk.
Right. So I'm going to start taking, and that is stainless steel. That needs to be able to be, you know, cleaned and free of microbes and stuff like that.
And then not just that, there's also other beverage companies like soda companies. So then you've got somebody that's got like an electrical background or meanders in welding and has got a desire to put things together themselves on a shoestring budget.
Right?
Yeah.
Like someone who can do a bunch of different things, a polymath, someone who can weld, someone who can know the fluid dynamics of how the pumps need to work and all that. Like it's more known now, but 1976 or 78, it wasn't.
And then says, I am going to spend like 16 hours of my day putting together all of this. Yeah. And then once I finally put this together, then I'm going to brew tomorrow for 20 hours and have it all go to crap.
To make 200 gallons of a beer that no one wants.
And then once I get it, I'm going to put it through my bottling machine, which I got from somebody over here, and it's broke. Right. And now I'm going to spend 24 hours.
Yeah. And the crazy thing was like this. I don't want to go too far down this path because there's so much to talk about.
Like, there's no time. There's no money.
Oh yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to say before saying I don't want to go down the path was
Sierra podcast.
The quality of the stuff that he made. So I think they finally the brew house that he created.
Another one late.
They brought another one. They sold it to another brewery in maybe Colorado or somewhere that was
which is
brewing.
Also the creation of an entire culture, right? Where you're like, go ahead.
And they were brewing with that up until I think into the 2000s. The original OG welded together dairy parts mash tun from Sierra Nevada was still like a workhorse making beer every day until like recently, and only then because Sierra Nevada bought it back.
Right.
They bought it back just
put
to
it on a
have
truck
it.
and bring it around and show people like we used to do this.
Right.
And there's another brewery at the festival like we did that too until last week when you bought it from us.
Yeah, right. So just the quality of the craftsmanship. These were some special people,
Right.
And then there were some special circumstances. I think the fact that there was nothing else like it, and I think there has to be a little footnote to the Grateful Dead in there. Also from Northern California, they were drinking their local beer, their counterculture beer, and they were, if Deadheads known to travel. They were traveling all over the country, bringing their local beer, this
Selling in parking
pale
lots.
ale. Yeah, people were, and they had a following then.
This is also the beginning of the kind of unspoken connectivity of hops and marijuana culture, right? Weed culture.
Yeah.
Where like, oh, it's dank. Oh, we're used to that. Like, oh, it has fruity character. Like that's as those things grew in appreciation, they're paralleled, right? Swag weed and the hops were better, but like the appreciation of those things
and a similar sensory
always
experience
existed
to tasting bitterness and to having like a burnt smoke, travel through your lips. There's probably a similar sensory experience, and them coming from the same whatever genus or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, not to fast forward too much, but decades later, it'd be like, oh, well, there's similar terpenes and blah, blah, blah.
But now we're trying to
But it was
isolate
like
things and-
the cultures were similar at that time.
Yeah.
So at the time, you've got somebody that's running around trying to do everything himself, wants to brew only with whole leaf hops, and is looking for the best price for anything. And then there's this hop that nobody wants, and it's very grapefruity and floral, and it's Cascade. And this Ken Grossman's just driving around in his van, and he's got, he's lucky to be on the West Coast, and he can drive up from Northern California into Oregon, and that's a lot. It's some hours, but he's got access to somebody that's willing to throw a couple, bales in the back of his truck and drive it on down.
And that's the Johnny Appleseed of these people disseminating this pale ale all over the country is kind of the Johnny Appleseed of IPA, of pale ale, of APA.
Yeah. Well, and there's that, like, if you're someone who makes stuff and you find someone who, like, makes the best thing that you use to make your thing, right? You find someone who makes the best paints or someone who can, like, stretch the best canvas. You get very excited and you're like, I'm going to go get those things to use. So,
I can't get this here. Well, maybe I'm going to make my own stuff now. Maybe I'm going to start a brewery.
Yeah.
And you have this little, this home brew, Tara Papazian had released, had published The Joy of Home Brewing. It was legalized now. It had technically been illegal. And so you have these breweries starting. And almost... So now we're in the late 80s,
70s,
let's say
early
like
80s?
let's skip a little bit. Let's go to the late 80s. All right.
And let's talk about too that one thing to
Fast
mention
cars,
is that
CDs.
He's trying to make money and he's making ale and he can turn it around. So now you've got the beer style that goes quicker. You've got the hops to fit the beer style that goes quicker. You probably have. You've got tastes that are trying to fight back versus pale fizzy lager. And
bottle conditioning.
Yes.
I mean, he was doing all sorts of like inventive stuff to help preserve his beer in less than ideal situation. Yeah. Very smart.
The refrigeration for beer was probably not a thing.
Right.
Like, there's
not that you could rely on.
Yeah.
So he was, doing all this. And then to me, it seems like APA, IPA, people started making IPAs very soon thereafter. Almost immediately, they're making
So what's the next
IPAs
big one?
as well.
Like, what's the next big opening up point?
Well,
You got
I
Sierra
think
Nevada.
the opening up point is how it already starts to bifurcate because you already start having regional sub-styles. You have the East Coast IPA and the San Diego style IPA is to me the next one that I kind of demarcate in my mind. And if there's something before that, because now it's going to become more of a discussion. Because
so we're going to the 2000s now.
No, I think
90s?
I think we're in like early 90s or
like Dogfish Head versus Stone.
Yeah. Or even
Do you see something in between
No.
that point that's important? I think this is right.
I'm just thinking. No, I think
Yeah.
you're correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As
I don't
far
know.
as like we're drinking beers and which ones are impacting the culture in a way.
Right. And I think Dogfish Head and Stone are two great, again, archetypes for the two.
Yeah.
East Coast IPA was a thing. There was East Coast, West Coast. It was probably also the Biggie Tupac thing. I don't know. But there was definitely, without a doubt, styles of IPA for people who were getting into it. East Coast style was maltier.
Here you got Harpoon, you got Red Hook.
Oh, yeah. You've got those. But then even you did have
Red Hook's an ESB, right? So even harkening a little bit back to that one beer style, the ESB.
Yeah, but you've also got out there on the East Coast, you would have Smutty Nose. You'd have Weyerbacher, Trogs. You'd have even Great Divide and stuff. They were making East Coast IPAs way back in the day.
I don't know how much more forward this is, but 90 Minute there was a moment that was the IPA,
Hoppiest thing.
right? It was the IPA was in the best beer in the world style conversations,
Right.
Which is interesting to look back on now. But I think that if you look at actual beer consumed, the San Diego style is probably just as prevalent, right? That
Probably.
kind of drier, paler. That was kind of the Hellas version of the
Very aggressive. And you also start seeing
But the malt is the enemy idea is what that kind of kickstarted
so
that.
we just want to focus on this ingredient, this hop. So our yeast is going to be as little esters as possible. Our malt is going to be just cracker light, and then we're just going to have tons of bitterness and tons of this aroma, this piney, dank, citrusy aroma. It's going to be grapefruit and pine. And I think in both cases, and then on the East Coast, you have a little bit more malty, but you're also having higher gravity. So you're having these stronger ones too. Both of them were doing the playing to the, this is extreme. That was definitely a thing. And I also think that planted a seed that is still going to this day. These this one goes to 11. We're doing something, this is, I don't know, Sam Calgione would probably say this is very punk. The original 90 Minute IPA was a picture of a guy driving a nail. I don't know if you guys ever remember the old OG 90 Minute one. I think he had to have it taken, he got a C and D. But it was an old carnival freak who was it was an X-ray of a guy who was hammering a nail in his nose. And that was the label for 90 Minute IPA. Think about that for a moment.
Right.
This is what they're preparing you for. This is going to be the sensory equivalent of driving a nail into your brain, with hops.
Pretty cool.
So you've got West Coast breweries, you've got Sierra Nevada, and you've got Anchor, and then we're now going to, let's think about both coasts at the same time. We'll think about East Coast starting to drive things in certain ways and start off that next kind of craft revolution. And we're talking about Dogfish Head. That's very much that. Then on the West Coast, we're talking Pizza Port, and we're talking Stone.
You've got the shoots in that same
going further north.
Yeah.
We got Bend, Oregon that we're talking about at the time. We're not talking about Goose, right?
Goose was coming up around them, but they were not part of that.
They were still making English style beers.
That was
for
the
most
micro
part.
brew. It was a brew pub, micro brew pubs, when those started to become popular, and they did become popular.
And they made a great IPA, but it was a classic English style IPA
Yeah.
more than it was 90 minutes telling a story and using Amarillo and Warrior all throughout this 90-minute boil. And Stone is trying to make this Columbus. I don't even know what else is in that thing, but this super dried out funky thing.
Leviathan? Was that what it's called?
No, I don't know.
Or Levitation. Wasn't it?
Levitation, there you
Levitation.
go.
Yeah.
But they're also
way
being like,
off.
it's not worthy. It's going to be hard to drink. Like, you should try to catch up to us. Like, I think Goose was throwing batting practice, like things that people would like that are in the tradition of pale ale, but probably not driving the conversation the same way that we've been
But also
talking about.
Brooklyn was doing something similar to maybe what Goose Island was doing.
Yeah.
You know, they definitely made a East India pale ale.
I thought that IPA was a driver. Talk about it later.
We can talk about it now.
No.
This is the point of the show,
I don't
right?
know. But we're all
Won
getting
medals.
to a point where, I mean, so are we talking about like things are just increasing, like the stakes are getting higher and like intensity's getting, you know, we're pushing for
Yeah,
this
so-
kind of
so
saturation point.
What choices?
Where everything's gonna explode.
What choices and values drove pale ale to where we are now?
Right.
Right.
Right. And I think it was what did these beers offer? They're higher in alcohol because even these IPAs, these early beers were stronger. I mean, a 6% beer in the U.S. was considerably stronger than what you would expect, unless you're drinking like a malt liquor or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you start getting into like 7%, 8%,
9%.
9%. I mean, these are just ludicrously strong beers.
Yeah.
For me, there was nothing in between. Like there was nothing in between Sierra and my first Stone, or like my first Pumpkin, which is not a pale ale. You know, other than I guess like
That's the last episode of this.
like Newcastle Blue Moon. You know, like Guinness.
Pete's Wicked,
Like-
maybe.
Like I mean, we're not talking pale ale, but just like I'm trying to think of like what was happening in beer between those times, and I don't know. I can't think of anything
it was-
pale ale driven until it was like hops.
Yeah, I
and
think it was
just
just
hops all the
gaining
time.
momentum for this thing that took off, and it being what's the difference between this is. I think this is where we're at the point of what's the real difference between craft beer and macro beer, right? How do we define ourselves as the thing that macro beer isn't? And one thing that macro beer wasn't at the time was hoppy, right? Is this? Am I on the right track?
Yeah.
Or am
Or extreme.
But I can't
'cause they
think
were
of
going
anything
for
other than-
extreme styles.
extreme. Yes.
But I can't think of anything other than like Sierra until I drank my first Three Floyds, or you know, until I drank my first.
I think
Between that time, other than exploring other beer with flavor, and those that could have been Guinness or
But the
Boddington or
but the avant-garde of
Hoegaarden.
hop character was what you're saying was still Sierra Nevada
Yeah.
until it was like Three Floyds.
Yeah, then you have like Alpha King, you have beers like that. Now you're talking mid 90s, and it was super piney, and it's still those same general flavors. You know,
You would experience that more on the East Coast. I mean, living in the Midwest, I can't really point to anything. You on the East Coast might have been able to point, and you're still on the East Coast at that time, right?
Yeah, I was like 13 though.
yeah.
This is
that was
I
a
think
creepy laugh.
I think this is a good point to talk about how the hops were changing, right? And so mid 90s, we're starting to get things like Simcoe, like Amarillo. Jude, can you talk about those hops like a little bit and how they would differ from an English kind of like EKG, and then how they would differ from a Cascade?
Well-
and how it would make this transition in the flavor profile of the beers possible?
Well, I don't know, but that's not the answer you want. But what I
Hey,
do
it's
know,
the answer I
what I
got.
do know is if Stone is the next beer we're talking about, then that's got to be, I don't know, like Centennial, Columbus,
Chinook, probably.
Chinook, and then what's the, not Crystal, what else? What I mean, Citra's not on.
Citra's not there
Citra's
yet.
not on board, and Simcoe, probably
Early Simcoe,
right?
probably, yeah.
I mean, that's the first time
Maybe.
like we're learning. And
Spoiler alert with the Citra, because that's the next big thing
Right.
that's going to drop. But we're not there yet.
but
Right.
I still think like
we're starting to get there,
everyone's
right?
making use of those hops. And Cascade's still very much a part of the mix. Cascade's still the number one. Like it's
They were
the
called
highest in
C-hops.
acreage. Yep.
Yeah.
But I think like Cascade is not the highest. Citra is the highest in acreage right now. But at that time, Cascade was
Cascade.
still very
Cascade
much
was
it.
number one
might
up
have been
until
might have been Willamette at that point still, but neither here nor there.
Maybe.
It was until
fight about it later.
until Budweiser said we don't want to use it anymore, and then it all got turned into hop extract for Lagunitas, and they've been bittering with it ever since. But
Yeah.
At that point, it turned of like the dawn of the century hops or whatever. It was like those ones that came right before Citra,
this
which
is
were
when we
all
stole
of
fire
those.
from the gods,
Yes.
where it was like, oh, these things taste like orange juice, and these things taste like guavas, and these things taste like pineapple.
And then,
But you guys are you're jumping way ahead because
sorry.
that hasn't happened yet. Like
No, that's happening.
I mean,
if we're talking about 90 Minute, 90 Minute has Amarillo in it.
Yeah.
90 Minute is one of like the first things that tasted like orange juice instead of it tastes like orange peel, right?
but I mean, I think we're getting to a point where it's those three hops that we talked about, those C hops, which could be old hops now, which aren't, are the most modern things
Yes.
at the time, and that's driving the most extreme flavors. And it's going to set the stage for, I don't know, whatever is, whenever we hop on Citra Amarillo before Citra.
right. I mean, that was
Simcoe.
that was the
Let's
big
not
one.
overlook
Yeah,
Simcoe.
Simcoe and Amarillo. Those were the big ones. I remember, people having these like, ooh, there's like you were saying, Mike, but papaya or pineapple, and then all that just gets absolutely blown out the door and changes IPA forever.
Because
when what happens?
Because beer goes from being like having hops that have floral character to having hops that have grapefruit character with some floral character. Maybe there's some earth, and then now hops have like bombastic citrus character.
Right.
All the citrus.
Right. And it goes from citrus peel and pith and grapefruit pith to
Juiciest
just
tangerines.
Juice. Yeah, like the
Navel. This is where all the descriptions of all of the oranges that you've never had in your entire life.
Go off.
This is where they all happen, and then this is when guava gets introduced. This is when papaya gets introduced.
passion fruit.
My favorite.
Yeah. Pog.
No, it's the one. It's the one that
Passion fruit orange
Dylan's
juice.
grandma grows.
Lychee.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's my favorite. And
Your
that's
favorite
when,
before you had lychees.
Yes, and that's when all hop character goes tropical.
Yeah.
And it sets the stage for everything that we're tasting now. But it's a cool time because you've got this like old flavor that's modern to this just grapefruit to now this is all like just out of this world citrus and tropical. And that starts to inform IPA, through from 2009 to the present day.
And while pale ale was always kind of defined as being the bitter style, the hop-driven style, the hoppier, the bitter style, this is where it starts going from being a beer that has hops in it to being featuring the hops as the main flavor component. Like we were talking about probably, I don't know, this like 40 minutes ago that the hops were seasoning for the malt. This is where it starts to switch to be, the malt is the background for these crazy flavors these hops can provide because they were either not desirable or didn't exist because of where they were being grown or how they were being bred before. And so when you start getting like Amarillo, Simcoe, even Centennial, like as like these next generation of like, holy shit hops, these are like, these are different. These are wild.
Sure.
And then when you get to the next generation, it's like
we're ready. Yeah.
I mean, it's fully on like, wow, these things are.
Well, and pale ale is a vehicle for hop character and hop flavor. It's a drinkable style, and on top of that, it's a naked style that allows all of these hops to shine. So it not only allows you to drink a ton of it, but then it allows you to experience it in ways where you're just coming to beer and you're experiencing all of these juicy qualities in ways that you've never associated with, and then it sets you on this path that.
So
Ties
so
back
what are we
into that.
talking about, Mike? Like specifically,
So
what?
I was going to say it ties back into that like thing we first started talking about, the ability to make pale malt and to make these cleaner beers that weren't as sludgy or as dark or as smoky, to make this clean malt flavor. These things wouldn't exist as beautifully or as consumably or as desirably on top of brownish smoked malt. So this goes all the way back to the beginning of that technology, that the Coke, creating like cleaner malt character. But then now we're getting these like crazy high alpha, high oil, different like combinations of the linalool and all these terpenes and like all this stuff, in which I think Jude can speak about much more eloquently than I can, but this is where it starts going crazy.
So what happens, I don't know if we've stated it is, like definitively or just put it out there, but it's Citra. Citra drops, it changes everything relatively overnight. I would say the most meaningful thing that has happened to craft beer in the last 10 years, certainly from maybe just bar none. I mean, I would say maybe buyouts, you could maybe say being something, but Citra just changed everything. It's hard to overstate how important that hop was. And I just looked it up. Cascade was the most grown hop up until 2018. So, like, that's how long. Like,
well, that's how much beer Sierra Nevada makes.
Right.
I'm perfectly honest.
Right. So, but now you have Citra, which was, originally, like, I think a Miller hop, and then they discarded it.
And nothing had been bred to deliver that type of Tangelo, citrus,
just
pineapple,
nothing.
None of that character. And you put it on pale malt, and it jumps.
Again, until this point,
it
was undesirable, right? It was things that would have been thrown in the alpha pile, right? Experiments of how do we make more efficient XYZ thing, and the byproduct happened to be, it smells like tangerines, but that's not what Budweiser, it's not what Miller Lite tastes like, so we use it to make it bitter.
And you probably have 1,000 breweries only online at that point.
Right.
If 1,000.
Way less.
And you've got this big, and you've got something that you've never tasted before.
And I think it had started, like, they originally had started it in like, so long ago.
In the 80s.
Yeah. I mean,
Widmer made a beer with it, like X something. In the
right. So, so if you want to go, I can give a very quick history of and mostly slightly hot
take history, baby.
So, so it was around since, like, the 80s. Miller said, no, we're not funding this, because they're always trying to grow different types of hops. They're experimenting, grow a little bit of that. Nope, we don't like it. Or this tastes great, but, it's too susceptible to mold, or it doesn't mature in time. There's a million reasons. Like, the greatest flavor hop of all time, more likely than not, was killed off because it just wasn't sustainable as a crop. And
think about that.
Right. I mean, it's probably, because the rates of failure to success, I'm sure there's ones that were just like, this is
the target they're shooting at is totally different.
Like, it might chew this one alive. It's not worth even trying, you know. But it's, so you had a grower who had this, like, field of, like, just keeping, like, one or two binds going of these different ones. If anyone ever was like, I want to, what do you got in the back room? Like how people go into my shop and ask for, like, except I don't have, like, the next Citra sitting back there.
You should come into the beer temple and ask, what do you got in the back room?
Right. And you'll be like, some podcasting equipment, some boxes. But anyway, so then I think, like, Widmer, Sam Adams, Sierra Nevada, a couple people, like, came together and somehow collaborated to, like, all right, let's put a little bit of money into R&Ding this Citra hop. And I think the first time it came out was Widmer's IPA, which it was did not have the name Citra yet. It was like XP something. Won gold at GABF. And then they said, it was a 30-year-long overnight success story, because this was a 30-year-old hop that everyone was like, holy hell, what is this?
What have we been doing our whole
lives? And then you have, Nick Floyd, again, just being ahead of things from a hop standpoint, being like, we're going to make zombie dust.
Creating the currency of the future.
He created the currency of the future. And if you ever wondered why during the Citra crunch of a few years ago, why Plenty of Torpedo was always being made, which is a Citra-dominant beer. Maybe it's because they had literally funded the origin of that hop, and Sierra Nevada was not going to not get as much Citra as they needed.
There was, like, a group of craft brewers that were like the Hop Quality Group or something like that was what they were called. It's like John Mallett and Ken Grossman and Vinny Treluzzo.
Mm-hmm. And then all the feedback was, let's go aroma and flavor, not alpha.
Kill
and then
lower.
Things started to get bred more towards that, and then that set the stage for everything that
everything that comes from that, I think, comes from the flavors that first we first saw with Citra.
And every aroma varietal that is popular in an IPA to this date comes from that group of people saying, we want these things and we want them produced in this manner. Lower kilning temperatures to preserve some of like the more volatile oils and compounds, and that we want to use them in this way, like that. Like all of the opportunity, like all the Sabros, all of the Sultanas. I don't even know what's cool anymore. All the Talus, whatever the thing. That's as far as my hop knowledge goes anymore. But
but like, so Mike, you were brewing with Pipeworks at the time. I remember some of the things that you guys started doing with those beers were, one, educating people on different types of beers, probably partially out of necessity because you didn't have contracts and you were, buying small quantities. And then you were one of the first that I remember, you being you guys you folks at Pipeworks, being like, well, these are so fruity, so expressive. What can we add to beer to start, to really complement and enhance that? And you started putting fruit and citrus into these beers.
That honestly started as a conversation collaboration with Tired Hands too, where they were talking about how they were using citrus with Hill Farmstead, and like they were talking about doing that, and we're like, oh, that's a great idea. And then like, oh, well, why wouldn't we use these fruits? Because everyone says these fruits taste like these, or these hops taste like these things. Why wouldn't you use these fruits to accentuate or to underscore or to create a different flavor profile and different pH and different acidity level and different kind of approach to how these things will taste? Like,
was that Maritime Law?
It was originally called Scurvy Ninja.
Yes,
because it was all we got a C&D, and so then
rightfully
it became
so.
Maritime Law. Yeah, fair, very fair,
very fair.
Yeah. No grudge. It was immediately like, yeah. Sorry.
So,
and then you've got on the topic of that, you've got local breweries popping up. So you've got these bombastic hops on, a hop like a beer style that maybe is the most popular style at that time as it is now, or maybe it's still just ascending. And then you've got the brewery down the block who's bottling or canning 2-day, 3-day fresh beer. So not only do you have hops that are just unlike anything you've ever tasted, but now you're tasting it, 2 days.
And if it wasn't the most popular, it certainly would have been the most popular had it not been for the unexpected massive success of another kind of singular guy, Pierre Celis, who made Hoegaarden. And that style was picked up, literally took a dead, extinct style, did not exist, wit beer, brought it back, and I forget his name, the brewer at the Coors Field.
Keith Villa.
Yeah, Keith Villa at the Sandlot, started making a series of beer called Blue Moon beers that they would make every once in a while. And they had a Blue Moon. One of the Blue Moons was a wit beer, and it just became so popular that Blue Moon just became that one. But it was one of a series, and it became by far the most popular, quote-unquote, craft beer. That launched a whole nother thing as well. But that was why IPA, if it wasn't the most popular at the time, Jude, the only reason IPA was not the most popular was because of Blue Moon and the other styles that were made as a result of Blue Moon's popularity.
For sure.
Also a beer that was kind of diverging from the beer taste like malt and hops into a beer taste like kind of like fruit and citrus, and literally put citrus in the serving. Yeah. And so this so IPA's gotten to a point where these the hops are so fruity and they're so citrusy and they're so guava-y and they're so passion fruity. Why don't we start using fruit in them? Why don't we start just putting oranges?
Became huge. And to use another archetype again, you want to say something?
No, I know you want to go now to fruited beers, but also too, double IPA is like So the first double IPA is Pliny the Elder, right? But like
Yep.
we're not talking like double IPA is ascending as a thing, and now you've got that as a backdrop for hops to go on top.
But you're also seeing like the East Coast
And everyone's falling in
style
love
and the
with
West
it.
Coast style, and this is where it's getting a little hot takey. But the two ideas are bigger in this way and bigger in that way. You know, bigger in ABV,
East
bigger
Coast.
in flavor profile.
Yeah.
The East Coast and the West Coast, and both of them are happening. You're getting more double IPAs, even though that was first named with Pliny.
And for whatever reason, everyone is coming to this. Like for whatever reason, people are in love with this. They're developing a
Instead
taste
of
for this.
Diverging,
Brewery-
we're converging on something.
there's a lower barrier of entry for people to start breweries. We're getting, and this is all just building and building
Yeah.
and building.
So there is one cool story about like that East Coast West Coast thing where you would talk about 90-minute was at the the top of the pile, and Pliny was the original double IPA, literally the original double IPA. Quickly thereafter, Vinny and Sam were also friends and have been paisans for a long time.
He might not be Italian. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. I mean, I think Sam's I think believes he is. So,
I like it though, Chris.
Italian enough.
I like it.
So they would go to GABF every year and have like a throwdown, and it would be like East Coast, West Coast. We're going to go. Let's do it. It's going to be 90-minute versus Pliny the Elder.
It was very much from the hip hop playbook.
Yeah.
Randall the animal
Well,
showed
so
up. at this point.
Pliny won, right? And I think then
Hearts
the
and
next
minds.
year, they brought out Randall the enamel animal. Randall the enamel animal, and they would
From the
essentially
Muppets.
yes, and they would dry hop it kind of, or infuse it with hops, and almost like this torpedo thing that they would do as it was being served, and they would serve 90-minute Randalled 90 minutes through hops, probably Cascade hops or something, and that would then beat Pliny the Elder, and that then 90-minute Randalled was the king, and then the next year Pliny the Younger came out as a direct result of that.
10% alcohol.
And if you guys remember, I still might be
double
the
dry
tagline.
hop, triple dry hop, maybe.
The tagline of Pliny was, still may be, no Randall required. And that's why it was called that, was because he was saying, like, we don't need to Randall our
Liquid
beer.
diss track.
Right, yeah, yeah. So it was Pliny the Younger, no Randall required. And it was literally a diss track response to Pliny, to 90-minute. So that's just a fun little side story
Where does
about
120 fit into that?
right? Who knows? 120, I think, was always
Now we're
been
having a
its own
pale ale
thing.
into stratospheres
Just
of
bizarro,
absurd, yeah.
extreme beer fest
So
stuff.
now everyone's getting into beer. You've got
Yeah.
Beer Advocate. You got Rate Beer. You've got things happening West Coast, East Coast. You've got Midwest. Coming
Starting
up.
to become
Two-Hearted,
its own
gotta
little
mention it.
Yep.
thing.
Yeah, Two Hearted. I'm thinking Surly. I'm thinking Three Floyds. I'm thinking Half Acre. Toppling Goliath is going to come up. I'm thinking Sculpin.
But so
It's
before, yeah,
coming
so you
up.
definitely have.
Right.
So Sculpin, if we were
Shoots
going to
is
pick
not
one,
here yet.
Yeah.
so Sculpin would definitely be, I would think, again, picking archetypes, the fruited beer avatar, I should say, because there were others, but like when Grapefruit Sculpin, that was the one that like it blew the doors open on this grapefruited IPA, which was already an amazing base IPA. I mean, one of the best of all time.
It's like one of your favorite beers.
Yeah.
But it was kind of one of the first steps into like, well, if
Milkshake territory.
Sculpin is good, the actual fruit that these hops are supposed to taste like is better.
And it was also, let's go grapefruit. Let's go the lime version. Let's go the this version, which sets up
Mango,
where we are today.
passion
Yeah.
fruit.
Right. But there's still, I think, but wait, there's more. Because I think the next thing, because it was going there, and then there's this kind of like there was a turn that came out of the
It's the best turn I think you're about to describe.
northeast.
The best
Habanero
yes.
Sculpin is what
The northeast
You're about to
of,
describe the
of
best
the U.S.
time. The best
Yeah.
time of beer in the last
Yeah.
15 years.
Tell me then. I want you to
No,
describe
you
it.
say it.
No, you said it's the best
Okay.
time. You
No, it
go.
was what there was hoppy beers that came out in like 2000. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. That's probably it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They were all fermented with, either Chico yeast or, English yeast that flocks out. And they were clear beers that had, they were either brewed with like two-row or Pilsner, but had malt character that still supplied malt character, but allowed hops to shine. These hops that are emerging, these are hops by Maine, or these are beers by Maine. These are beers by Half Acre, Three Floyds. I'm thinking Surly, Hill Farmstead.
If you ever want to go
Treehouse,
back in time
Trillium.
and drink one of these beers,
Not just yet.
Not yet. Sorry.
go to
Not
Ohio
too
and
excited.
get a fresh fathead. Because it is.
That's
It's
probably
like
right,
going
yeah.
back in time to then.
Hey, send the check, Fatheads. Come
Right.
on.
Come on. Just send some beer.
If you made a nickel, or if they made a nickel
I know.
for how many times it was
Dude,
mentioned on this
it's-
podcast.
And I
what I'm
keep
saying.
like drinking it again and being like, am I overhyping this beer?
No, every time it's on the
It's
show,
so
it's
good.
But that's the
when you
style.
point at the glass.
That's the
Yeah.
style of beer that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Pipework should be mentioned in the two. Spiteful definitely should be mentioned
Yeah.
in it. It's that style of beer. It
Three
was
Floyds
very
was just
pale. Yeah.
killing it
Very
at the
pale.
time.
little dextrose.
Pipeworks, yeah, for sure.
Little that oniony, alliumy thing, but mostly that still grapefruit, still citrus forward. A little sprinkle of that citrus Simcoe mosaic thing that was undulating underneath.
You had never experienced those hops, up until that point. So everything was brand new all the time. You had a fresh growler that you could finish one day. Growlers for life. And it was the best of times. Even like, Great Lakes would distribute beer fresh here. First time I ever had Mosaic was a beer they made called
Yes.
Chill Wave.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I remember
Oh my
being
gosh.
so hyped on Chill Wave. Which is funny, like, pick up a Great Lakes. We have one right in front of us. It's tasting fantastic. A little amber lager, but Chill Wave being like a mind-blowing beer, something from Great Lakes, being like, oh, we gotta make something like this. How do we make this?
And then,
Tastes like berries.
Yeah.
And
it
makes me-
Is this blue? They put blueberries in this?
Yeah.
there's a lot of locally made wet hop beers that were coming out at that time, which are very much inspired by
brewed
pale ale that are coming here that every time it came out, you had to get it. Even going as far back as like Great Divides, fresh hop beer,
Again, Sierra Nevada, tip of the hat. I mean, invented
Celebration.
the modern fresh hop and beer. I mean, they just literally created
And
it.
again, we were talking about a bunch of different breweries, but they also have like one of the best Citra beers. We had one today. Like,
Yeah, Torpedo.
the Torpedo, that extra pale ale or extra IPA,
Extra
even
IPA.
more IPA. How do you get better than that?
Yeah. But are we
There's no
ready for
such
the
thing
next?
as
Are we
extra
ready for the
pale
next
ale.
huge
Yes.
Seismic. Let's go.
seismic is coming out of New England? Now there's some people who there's some debate as to where exactly it happened, but it was happening in New England for sure. It was probably happening, I would say, in Vermont
I would
for sure.
I would
think
say it's
so.
definitely
Yeah.
Vermont.
I would say kind of The Alchemist was the alchemist behind it. Some people would disagree, but things were changing, and you're getting these hazy IPAs, right? For the first time, this New
Drink it
England
out of the
style.
can 'cause it's
Right.
unsightly.
Well, what are you getting?
And Jude, tell me. No,
You're
you
getting
tell
so-
me what you're getting.
You're
Yeah.
getting you're getting everything that you loved from that previous era that we were talking about, but it was softer
Soft.
and it was juicier, and it had that dry hop haze, but just a little bit deeper. But it was just an extension of everything that you were falling in love with.
Right. I remember, not to interrupt you, but I remember being at the first Shelton Brothers Festival, which was probably 2011 or 12, and having an Edward for the first time and being like, what the... Sorry, Serge. Fuck is this? Like, what? How is... Because it was like Daisy Cutter, but it was like this different experience in your mouth.
And 2 years later, I was at the Shelton Fest in California, and I had Treehouse, which, as you know, of iteration of I had Julius, and later
favorite beer is Kicking
later would
Fiend
become
Julius.
Kicking Julius would become my favorite beer of all time.
We're gonna have to put an expiration date on that joke.
Yeah, right.
Never. Have you listened to the show?
Yeah.
No.
We don't know how to. Yeah.
That's a joke. That's,
So-
that's the only reason I can say there's an expiration date.
Yeah, no, but so I do think if we're trying to do through lines, though, I think what we're seeing with the fruited thing to New England is a bit of a leap, but it's people trying to get these fruity, juicy characteristics in their beer. And it's for also the first time that I think they're starting to restrain hops at the same time. They're pulling down the bitterness.
Yeah, it's the first time bitterness and hoppiness are not totally woven together.
I'm going to derail us for a second.
Please.
Does anyone
We're
know,
going late,
I don't
though,
have,
so we
I
have
know.
to, we do have to
It's going
go.
to be a 4-hour show.
Yeah.
But
I'm just going to say the genesis of, there being, the alchemists using Conan and deciding we want to use an English strain that's low flocculating, that's going to go and do this, and we're going to take the chance. We don't need to talk about this now.
No, it's huge. No, this is the time to talk about
it. It's
it.
a divergence of the way the beer looks in the glass, it has to be perfectly clear. That's what Budweiser told us it should be. That's what good beer is. It's not the first time, but it's one of the most impactful times a choice was made to be like, we like the way this tastes more, and it looks murky in the way we're not supposed to let it look. But we'll sacrifice.
It's not all Budweiser though, because even going back to England, bright beer.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
I'll let us keep going forward. We'll talk about this off the air.
No, I mean I think this is part of the discussion. I think it's how.
I think there is a chapter of this discussion of Instagram and the visual aspect of beer becoming more important. But I think we're about.
But I don't think it ever.
We're 14 years from that.
But that we're going to use yeast now to accent.
Yes.
What the hops are doing. Mm-hmm. It's going to produce a look, which also, which changes the way you think about the beer, which creates the expectation because you're going to drink it with your eyes first, and that we're going to bitter this lower. We're going to use all these, hops. We're going to hop it past, 2 pounds per barrel is big at the time. Sorry. 2 pounds per barrel is big at the time. And now we're going to go to 3. We might go to 4. We're going to go to 5.
Go to 9.
We're going to past it. We're going to use London 3, and we're going to make it even more jelly and creamy and soft, and we're going to throw a ton of oats.
Well, I remember
a ton of wheat.
I remember at this same time, we're in 2012 to 2014 era right now, right? We made at Pipeworks had made this English style summer ale, which is a beer that maxes out at 3.5%. But as the brewery kept growing, this morphed into some sort of English style double IPA. So it was still being made with a London 3 yeast, which was what it was made when it was a 3.5%
Chris
beer.
called that beer out there was a podcast
it's a Nelson Sauvin London 3 beer made in Bombers in 2012, and Chris being that's the best beer you guys have made. It's got this bubblegum thing. There's got this hop character. There's an ester character to it, and we were just but it's really expensive to get that yeast all the time, so we didn't make it anymore.
For all those people out there who say that I hate hazy beer,
you loved the first one made in Chicago accidentally.
Yeah,
but
it was great.
Sonorous, I think, is what that thing was called.
Something like that.
It was a Nelson Hazy.
It made me
Nelson
buy
Hazy's
it.
Existed.
It was so good.
You said it, so I went and I bought it. I never forget it.
So you're saying that Sonorous launched the hazy IPAs at Hoppy, which was pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Yep.
But so just to keep things rolling,
on track.
So you've got now these beers now are becoming less bitter, which by I would say definition, makes them sweeter, right? If they're less bitter, they're going to be sweeter. So the beers are becoming sweeter.
Yeah,
right?
Maybe
not sweet, but they're not as dry. They're not as bitter.
Yeah,
so I mean,
bitter.
They're going to.
You have a yeast strain that doesn't ferment sugars all the way down, so it's going to have it already has a softer feel and leaves more residual sugars around.
Right. So that I think naturally is what's happening. People are then leaning into that. You have people now adding oats. You have people adding all these other
maltodextrin, lactose. So we start trying to build body, build sweetness, because if the lack of bitterness is good, sweetness must be better, right?
Well, and also mouthfeel is a huge part of that style.
Absolutely.
Always has been. I mean,
mouthfeel is very important. Let's not undersell that.
They were very soft. And it was something that was unique to that. What the early New England IPAs that I had made them so unique was at the time I didn't think, ooh, these are sweet. I think a lot of times they weren't as sweet as they often are now.
I think the ones we were talking about aren't particularly sweet.
Yeah,
It became,
but they were soft, and they were hazy.
and they weren't bitter.
Yeah,
Well, they hit you in a way that you hadn't experienced before.
yeah,
Yeah.
They hit your tongue and they just fell off. You know, they just like disappeared into the abyss,
Oh,
and you had
they
never
went up.
tasted that.
They went up. They didn't go down into your mouth. They went up into your brain. Like it was
Yeah.
like something crazy. Like I remember the first time I went to Hill Farmstead, like I avoided the hoppy beers because like I've had these from like all these other places, and then like the last beers I had were like, the hoppy beers. Like, oh God, oh man, these are different. These are crazy good.
They provided a different sensory experience, and it
Right.
all, you know, and to think it goes all the way back to bitters in England, and you know
I think we've pretty effectively
1800s,
drawn that
you know.
line.
yeah. But we're still not quite all the way there, because I think we're still going down a path where I think they're leaning into the flavor of hops, and they were leaning into it by adding fruit. Then they were leaning into it by getting some esters, and just there are new hops coming out. There are new hop products coming out, and they're just leaning into it. And I would say that these lactose IPAs, milkshake IPAs are kind of the next thing, because this is like this. They're so juicy. They're so juicy. They're so juicy. So it's like, well, I'm going to make an Orange Julius. I'm going to make a beer that is so juicy.
Which is delicious.
Yeah, because juice is sweet, and we're going to just just make it even more so. So I think the next thing you have, and again, Tired Hands. I mean, in the U.S., I think Omni maybe was the very first, like the proto milkshake IPA, and then you have Tired Hands, really who created the style as we know it,
The milkshake.
IPA, and I do think you can draw a line from like Citra to the milkshake IPA, and to me, in my mind, I mean, I kind of see the path that it took. It was just people leaning into a certain characteristic, and how do we accentuate that characteristic in different ways.
I think you also saw like the creativity of brewers coming out and saying like, there's a way that I could put these ingredients together to deliver on an exciting and never experienced before drinking experience, and do it with oats, and do it with wheat, and do it with hops, and add a little milk sugar, and and all these other processes. And I'm gonna make you think about beer in ways that you've never thought about before. And when you try it, it is a mind-blowing experience, and you can't believe that. And then not only that, but it's like, but then I'm going to up myself. The next time I'm going to use this and give you an experience you've never had before. And people were not thinking about or making beers like this before, and they were throwing it in cans with cool-ass labels and limited quantities, and it was made down the block, and then all like this culmination of events gave you an experience you had never had before, and you were beer should be exciting, and you were looking for that. And that is what made it, and that is what we are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from there, you even go to, smoothie IPAs, smoothie seltzers, all that stuff. I think is a direct lineage to these IPAs.
I'm so happy we've drawn a direct line from
Smooge.
From
Yeah.
Coke,
Yes.
malt to Smooge.
Yeah.
We've done it, guys.
Hooray. But I do think, I mean, hey, I'm sure a lot of people will be like, you're an idiot, and here's why. But
Please do.
hey,
If you think we are idiots and you know why, send us an email.
yeah.
But you know what's funny is like the
Please do.
thing that the whole movement was based on was pushing the boundaries and giving you something that you never had before.
Right. And to delight, right? The idea is to delight.
Yeah. Sam Richardson from Other Half said something one time, like on some panel, that someone was trying to like take down where beer is going. And he was just basically saying like, beer should be fun. Like beer should be exciting. So if there's an audience of people who are excited about these things, then that's my job to deliver on it. And I want to deliver on it. So it's like, you almost like, you can't critique it because you can make the argument that pushing for flavor in the 70s and the 80s, isn't too different than pushing for flavor. Now, we may have gotten really far from it, But at the same time, the spirit, it'd be hypocritical to say that the spirit that we were in love with then is responsible for the things that we don't like now.
And I also think I think it's for me, the way I feel of it as how all these things have changed. It looked like it wasn't maybe singular, but maybe very small pockets of change that quickly were disseminated, quickly being relative to the time. West Coast IPA took a while to go, but it happened very, very fast. I think the speed of that adoption is accelerating, again, because of social media. I do think that the visual aspect of the beer matters more than ever. I do think hazy, social media played a huge role in that as well. But I also think, when people say, like, what's going to be the next big thing in IPA, it's the hardest thing to guess, because someone is going to come up with something that consumers and other breweries are going to taste, and just like Ken Grossman are going to be like, I want to make that. I don't have beer like that. I want to make that. And it's going to explode. And it's funny, like, you see people trying to, like, manufacture it right now. They're trying to manufacture the next big thing. I'd be curious to see if that's going to happen. I think the next truly big one is going to be organic. Like so many of these others have been. Like all these other examples, I think, have been very organic.
Craft beer has been on like a 28-year, 30-year run of just happening to bump up against things that people wanted, right? Like, and so we'll see what the next 15 years look like for that, right? Like, what
does anyone have an idea of what that might be?
Well, if like beer has had like let's say like the way you think about beer styles.
Saison IPA.
Well, think about it. Like if you think about beer style and like it growing in percentage just by beer style, if beer style has had like an 80% like growth within the last however many years, like you can't expect it to repeat that. It's probably going to come right back down.
Right.
So it's probably going to be more of like an innovation of subtlety, or like a change in, whether we revert back to, beers that existed 10 years ago, but we look at them with new eyes. But I mean, we've had double-digit growth in just thinking outrageously about how the way beer is made. Mm-hmm. That where else can it go?
Right.
Unless there's a way to go 100% with some craziness, but it's probably going to be more in subtlety in the way that like all the way we've been doing things, just in little ways, and finding your pockets of people who appreciate that.
And let's extrapolate that onto hop breeding and the way that hops taste.
Because the hops are tasting different.
Right.
Not like Citra.
So we've gone from grapefruit peel, which is like a difficult kind of thing to get into, right? It's bitter. It's kind of, to straight orange juice. And how much further towards like, and then now into like coconut and vanilla with sour, like how much further towards the pleasure centers can you get?
I mean, we have smoothies now.
Like the cool new hops, as far as I learned through you, are now becoming more floral and more like
and woody,
and woody, right?
Yep, and more rosemary,
right? So how can we can't breed hops more towards lizard brain desires, right? And so how do we as producers of things be like, well, these hops aren't going to keep going towards exactly what you want, but the combination of them or the way we're presenting them to you is going to be even more rewarding. Like we're in a very strange spot with that.
Yeah. It's tough to go even like higher than we are right now. I can't imagine that we can get to a 12 when we're at an 11.
Yeah.
But it's probably maybe going back to canvas
until we do it.
Yeah.
And just when you're out there,
help us breed some hops.
Right. I would love people out there to, if you have a Fuller's London Pride and then you have a Smooge,
Remember,
it's insane. But
same beer.
Can you go from Fuller's to Sierra Nevada and can you taste the Thruway? Can you then go to a 90-minute or a 60-minute, let's say, or to a Pliny or to a Stone IPA from there, to a Grapefruit Sculpin, to a Treehouse, and from a treehouse to a lactose, and from a lactose to a smoothie, from a smoothie to a smooge. I mean, I think you can.
Yeah.
I think it really does go that way, and I think
this
it. Yeah.
This is the next corporate tasting you do.
Yeah. Right.
It's 48 beers.
Exactly.
And it goes from 1684.
Why these beers are the
to
same?
2025.
Why you love bitter?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And maybe those
And
subconsciously.
Cascade.
And it ends with a bluebird bitter. You're like, doesn't this just taste like the smooge we had?
I'm going to have a Slurpee machine that you hand pump, and then I'm going to have
Everyone
that you hand
gets-
actuate, and then one and the hand pump. And like,
yeah.
these are the same thing.
Which one's better?
Right. Exactly.
Go
Yeah.
to your 7-Eleven.
Exactly.
Put real ale in the Slurpee machine.
Exactly.
Start with Young's.
Yeah.
Anything else that you guys want to say before we get out of here? It's been a bit of a long show, but I think we have time for some final words.
I think all of these things can exist. You know, the beer that you want on Monday is different than the beer that you want on Wednesday, and is different than the beer you want on Friday. And the beers that we've talked about, the reason you might want the beer on Friday night is the same reason that you want the beer on Monday, and they're probably connected by the experience that you've had through them all. And they can all coexist without that saying anything about you or without that saying anything about the beer. There's a beer for all times. And the reason you're drinking it is because it provides you with enjoyment. And I guess if you want to go into it and why they exist and how they started, you can do that. But as long as it provides you, you know, with a sense of happiness, that's all on your own, and you can go wherever you want, and it's all up to you and to nobody else. And it doesn't matter. No one else really matters. It's wherever you want to take it and wherever it lines up with your life. So there's a lot to celebrate when it comes to beer, and it's all out there if you want to go through it.
Oh, well put. Laugh track right on time.
I'm hearing these things. I'm thinking it's happening in the alley. I'm
Right.
like,
No.
who's having the party?
Yeah, there's a party. We're about to go join the party,
Thanks,
I
Serge.
think.
That was beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Jude, so much. And thanks, Mike and Serge. And thank you guys for listening. Would love to hear any feedback, any comments, anything else you want us to dive into in a hot takey way. Anything more than that, I can't promise you. But we have all that info in the show notes. But real quickly, it's Insiders at Craft Beer Temple if you want to send us an electronic letter. I almost slipped up. And, yeah, that's it. We're going to be back next week. Surge-less, but we are going to have a roundtable, I believe, is next week.
Oh, it's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Surge, save us.
Last time there was no Surge, I think I just left you moments before the show started.
Yeah.
I was like, I got to go. This is how you
I
do it.
also was
Goodbye.
supposed to host the show, and so, it was good.
Yeah.
You all
But
loved it.
thanks, all you guys. This has been a lot of fun. I'm going to go drink a torpedo, I think. I think I have to at this point.
Let's do it.
All right, guys. See you later. So long.
Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember this is what we wanted. Remember this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again.